Trump's senior director for counterterrorism has called upon the UK to allow British ISIS members currently trapped abroad to return home. Sebastian Gorka, a far-right commentator who now sits at the heart of the US government, said that Britain must repatriate citizens who joined the extremist group if it wants to remain a key US ally. Now, the most well-known of these cases is that of Shamima Begum, who joined ISIS a decade ago when she was 15 and has since had her citizenship revoked. This is a shift from the position taken by the Biden administration, which stated that Britain did have a moral responsibility to repatriate ISIS recruits, but did not indicate that this would in any way impact diplomatic relationships. Speaking to The Times, however, Gorka said this: "Any nation which wishes to be a serious ally and friend of the most powerful nation in the world should act in a fashion that reflects that serious commitment to the fight against ISIS. That is doubly so for the UK, which has a very special place in President Trump's heart, and we would all wish to see the special relationship fully re-established." So the commitment that Gorka mentions there refers to the idea that those who have committed crimes abroad should be brought back to face accountability by the criminal justice system. It also refers to the position amongst some security officials that people like Begum pose less of a risk if monitored and potentially imprisoned in the UK than if she remains in detention camps in Syria and therefore outside of British jurisdiction. So this position is the one taken by the US, which has a policy of repatriating and trying US citizens who join groups like ISIS, whereas Britain has, in some cases, revoked the citizenship of those who have or are eligible to apply for citizenship elsewhere. This policy has left as many as 20 British women, 40 children, and 10 men in camps currently controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, this security-based argument is categorically different to the one being made by human rights organizations like the UN, who believe those like Begum, who was a minor when she left to join ISIS, were potentially victims of trafficking. The UN has also expressed concern that the revocation of Shamima Begum's citizenship, despite being born in Britain, and rendering her effectively stateless, violates international law and could therefore lead to a two-tier justice system in which those who have non-British heritage face radically different consequences for committing crimes than those who do not. Responding to Gorka's comments, Foreign Secretary David Lammy said this on Good Morning Britain.
One thing that you're willing to consider, to bring back ISIS terrorists to the UK, because here we can keep them safe?
Well, Ed, we in the Foreign Office and Yvette Cooper in the Home Office will always put British security interests first and the safeguarding of our population. Shamima Begum will not be coming back to the UK. It's gone right through the courts. She's not a UK national. We will not be bringing her back to the UK. We're really clear about that. We will act in our security interests, and many of those in those camps are dangerous, are radicals. Some of them, if they were to come back to prison, would have to be, frankly, jailed as soon as they arrived. I'm looking forward to discussing these issues with our US counterparts. In fact, I'll be discussing this issue with Antony Blinken later on today in Rome and at the weekend in Riyadh with the group of nations supporting Syria particularly.
Right.
So
okay.
It's a hot issue,
We're
and of
almost,
course, I'm right in the middle of it.
Lammy there doubling down on the position of stripping British citizenship from those like Shamima Begum. Now, it is interesting that this conversation is happening now because grooming has been in the news quite a bit recently. We don't know what exactly happened in Shamima Begum's case and in the case of dozens of other men, women, and children who traveled to fight in ISIS. And we do know from some reports that what Begum witnessed and potentially participated in was shockingly violent and deplorable. But we also know that these extremist organizations are notoriously predatory with very sophisticated recruitment strategies that target vulnerable people, and that Begum was just 15 when she was convinced by a much older man to travel to Syria and marry him. In every other circumstance, we by default would not consider a 15-year-old girl to be capable of consenting to marry anyone, even if she appeared to be fully aware of what she was doing. As the UN have commented, there is a credible suspicion that Miss Begum was recruited, transferred, and then harbored for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Under international law, consent or voluntariness or use of force, deception, or coercion is irrelevant where the victim of trafficking is a child. The obligation to investigate credible evidence of child trafficking is essential to ensure accountability for this heinous crime and serious human rights violations. Implementing these obligations requires action and the courage to listen when judicial bodies make findings indicating a credible suspicion of child trafficking. The circumstances under which young people like Shamima Begum crossed several national borders into a war zone under the instruction of a man she believed loved her have never been properly investigated, even though it carries clear hallmarks of human trafficking. Instead, she became the poster child for a policy that could lead to millions of people in this country who have any non-British heritage, who are, of course, disproportionately Black and brown, becoming second-class citizens. Because for those people, we now have legal precedent that means if they commit a particular kind of crime, or potentially in the future any crime, they won't face the same justice system that white British people face. They won't just be treated as a citizen who committed or is suspected of committing a crime and therefore face the proceedings that are associated with that crime. Instead, they can be classified as a national security threat and therefore, an inherent outsider and stripped of their citizenship, even if it renders them stateless. And of course, if you're stateless, you have no access to any legal protection or basic services, and you're at severe risk of further exploitation. Because remember, Begum is not even a dual citizen. Her parents have Bangladeshi citizenship, but she doesn't. And Bangladesh made very clear that they would not grant her citizenship if she applied. So it's very easy to hear alleged stories of Begum sewing bombs into suicide vests and watching over the decapitation of hostages and feeling intense moral outrage. But it's also important to not allow that outrage to lead to the government gutting the citizenship rights of millions of, let's face it, largely non-white people, rights which are therefore a very good reason. James, I'm interested to know what you make of this intervention from Trump's administration, particularly the idea that he pushed it further by saying that not repatriating British ISIS fighters could harm the special relationship.
Well, look, I think, Dalia, what you just said on this was very well put in terms of like the wider consequences of this decision, which is a pretty grubby one at best. I mean, you're basically saying, oh, there's this issue we don't want to deal with, so we've shoved it off somewhere else, which is all these fighters, however they arrived in Syria, they're all there now, so we can wash our hands of the whole thing. That's just the sort of one level of failure in this. The deeper failure is exactly as you say. This is setting up something that starts to look like a two-tier citizenship process, a two-tier criminal justice system. It is, as even Jacob Rees-Mogg said, I think correctly, that this is basically looks like a racist decision. These are the consequences that fall out of this. Gorka's intervention takes place, and you have to see a pattern here with what the Trump administration is doing, which is kind of clearing as much space as possible to negotiate with everyone once Trump is in office. I mean, that's what it looks like. That you make a hell of a noise now in order to sort of give yourself the maximum freedom of maneuver with everybody later on. So you threaten huge tariffs on China or Canada and Mexico. You say you're going to invade Greenland. You throw all this stuff out because what you want is everybody else on edge so that you're in a better negotiating position somewhere down the line. I think that is where this is coming from. If you start to detect a logic behind what the would-be or soon-to-be Trump administration is doing, that they have this transactional approach, they have this negotiation approach permanently to dealing with the rest of the world, and it's a part of that. So it's looking for leverage and using something that Gorka, I'm sure, realises can act as a bit of a pot-stirring thing back in Britain, and particularly this issue raised at this time for this government. That, I think, is what's going on here. Cynical, of course. I wouldn't trust anybody's motives on the Trump side as far as you could throw them, frankly, but that's what it looks like.
I believe that Trump calls that the art of the deal. Just nuke the entire boundaries and parameters of the situation so that you can get what you want. Fortunately, it seems like it kind of worked for him. Now he's president of the US for the second time.